So, welcome to episode 8, a special episode for the Chinese, and appropriately we have the Bruichladdich Octomore from Islay, which is renowned for its peated malts. So, once the barley is harvested, it's put in a vat and moistened, then the water's drained, the barley's put on a malting floor, which is stone or concrete, and it's left a few days so that the barley starts to sprout, and then it's collected up and put in a peat stack. You will recall we had in an early episode the Bunnahabhain Croc Vona, which is Gaelic for peat stack, and Octomore is Gaelic for the Big Eight. So just near Bridgend in Islay, a farm was divided into 8 sections. The biggest one was the 8th and was named Octomore, and it's not far from where the Bruichladdich distillery is. And Jim McEwen, who retires in July, has had a few years now bringing the Bruichladdich distillery back to its former glory. This is actually for the UK market, so it was privately imported from the Antipodes, and whereas in Islay there are peat monsters such as the Bunnahabhain, this Octomore is a leviathan in a class of its own. It has a peat content of 167 parts per million, so a very, very smoky whiskey. I'm having a bit more of this than I normally do. So, we touched in the last episode on how we're looking at a new paradigm or a new model for how the universe works. And the ancient Greeks were dominated by Aristotle and the idea that there was no zero and there was no infinity. Zero and infinity sort of go hand in hand for reasons most people understand. But even back in ancient Greek times, various groups developed atomism, and atomism was, as I say, repressed by Aristotelianism for many millennia, well, for several thousand years, until the Renaissance, when it was revived, and it has become really the dominant paradigm that we know about today. So atomism basically is the idea that the world consists of bits of matter, like grains of sand, lots and lots of little grains of sand, and if you have a grain of sand, you can move it from one place to another through a void. So there's basically nothingness, or space, which has no content, it's a vacuum, it's empty. Here's a piece of matter, it's an atom, you move it from that place to that place, and it doesn't really matter that there's nothing in between because it's a void, and so it goes. And the dominant paradigm today is materialism, which basically is an offshoot of atomism. And really what we have at the moment is this need to resolve several mysteries about the world. One is the joining of relativity theory with quantum theory, very different ideas about how very large things work. General relativity concerns itself with the universe, large distances. Quantum theory deals with the very small. And we've always wanted to try and unify the models that we use to describe physical phenomena at both these extremes, the very large and the very small, and join them into a quantum theory of gravity as it's commonly known. And what's important to understand about physical theories is that they all fall into a category of devices that we call instruments, or into a theory called instrumentalism, where physical theory is ultimately concerned with being able to predict the way the world works and to explain observable phenomena, and from those observations predict what the future outcome of a particular physical event is going to be. So the pitfalls of using your phone as a video recorder is that inconsiderate people choose to ring you just in the middle of your recording. Anyway, I'm back. I think what we were talking about was instrumentalism, and the important fact that physical theories are about observable behaviour, but they're not necessarily about what Kant calls das Ding an sich, the actual reality behind those observations. So we sort of touched on it last episode, where we look at a completely new paradigm, digital physics paradigm, where instead of atomism, where we have an atom of matter moving through a void to another location, we actually turn that whole idea on its head, and we have a void that's actually replete with space atoms, very small space atoms, very closely packed like Florist's foam, and that the atom itself, or the instance of reality, is actually a piece of information that describes or presents itself as that reality moving, that information moving across between the various space atoms that might separate a particular distance. And this is a truly revolutionary idea. It was first thought of or introduced to the world by Konrad Zuse, who was a German computer scientist in the 60s, and Ed Fredkin's done a lot of work in this area, and it is in fact a very popular idea, but it has some other important ramifications. Obviously, it has importance in terms of our understanding of what's actually happening when material objects translate through this solid space. But it also, as we'll see in a minute, has ramifications for that phenomenon of quantum theory, where an object can be in two places at the same time, or in fact it can be in a multitude, or in fact an infinity of places at the same time, or in fact going from one place to another, it can pass through an infinite number of different paths before selecting the most ideal path. And most people who are interested in this sort of stuff have come across that. But you know, the revolution that Konrad started is not unlike the Copernican revolution, where you know he had to battle pretty hard against entrenched Aristotelianism, and you know the Ptolemaic system, which said, look, the Earth's at the centre of the universe, we're the centre of attention, this is where it all happens, and everything else revolves around us and around the Earth. And Copernicus and Galileo and Giordano Bruno said, look, actually the sun is at the centre of the solar system, or the universe as they saw it legitimately, and the Earth's going around the sun. And we're all pretty happy that that's the case now, but back in the day it was a bit hard to convince the authorities that they needed to sort of turn their models on their head and look at the more simple way of looking at things. And one has to ask, is the idea of having a solid space foam in which objects, with information about objects moves, is that more simple than just having an actual object that moves in a void? It is necessarily a better model because it explains the phenomenon that we observe, and that is that the speed of light is a constant in any inertial reference frame, which of course is the famous first postulate of Einstein's special theory of relativity. But the other great mystery that we face here in the 21st century, and that everyone wants to have an answer to, is consciousness, and coming to some sort of understanding of how the mind works and how we come to be conscious, and how it is that we think. And again, we need to turn some of our ideas on their head. The prevailing paradigm, materialist paradigm, is that there's this piece of wetware, there's these neurons, billions of them, admittedly, in our skulls, and this amazing machine produces the consciousness that we're all familiar with, and that it's doing all the work of our thinking. But it's not necessarily the case, and most people, I guess, have found themselves walking along one day, and all of a sudden they get a flash of brilliance, and some great idea comes into their head, and there's a class of people in this world who say, hello, what an amazing brain I have, how incredible that it has managed to collate all of these data that it's taken in over the years, and all this information that's learnt, and to arrange them in a particular pattern and to come up with some brilliant synthesis. There's another school of thought that says, okay, that idea or that great insight has actually come from an external source. And the problem with that is that, back in the 50s, or even earlier, probably in the 30s, when the idea of UFOs first emerged, people started reporting that there were such things as UFOs, and there were aliens in other worlds coming to get us. And the classic, of course, is the tinfoil hat that people would wear in order to be a Faraday cage that stops the only phenomenon that is understood for the transmission of information in the universe from a scientific perspective is electromagnetic radiation. So, radio waves were very popular. We know that radio waves can only travel at the speed of light, and so very quickly it was established that if there were alien civilizations in the universe, it would be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years for them just to send a simple message from where they are to where we are. And so quickly this dominant materialist paradigm has taken over towards the latter part of the 20th century, and certainly is all pervasive in the 21st century, that there's no God. Anyone who thinks that brilliant ideas and inspiration come into their head from somewhere else in the universe, or from God, or wherever, is mad, basically, because there's no mechanism known to science which would allow such a communication to occur. And so they're blinded, basically, to the thought that there might be an alternative explanation for some of the behaviours that we recognise in the behaviour of people and behaviour of mind, and what people who think more deeply about this say is that perhaps it's possible to actually look and investigate the mind from within. So they actually look at the way one thinks, looks at the way one's ideas come into one's head, and say, okay, is this because there is some fantastic computer in my skull, or is it because my skull is somehow an interface to another source of information? And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in upcoming episodes. But what I want to touch on today primarily is to reflect again on the notion that the space atom, that fundamental part of reality, which consists of two self-simulating Turing machines, one Turing machine simulating another Turing machine, and together they simulate an atom of space, is that the Turing machines themselves are just numbers. They have no dimension. No dimension in space, and they do have a dimension in time because of the period between when one machine simulates the other machine, and so they provide a time base. But it's only when they first simulate, as in a virtual reality of a space atom, 10 to the minus 35 meters in diameter, that the notion of space actually comes into existence. So, although there are 10 to the 186 of these space atoms in the observable universe, because the space atoms themselves do not have any dimension themselves, that all of what we recognize as space is actually simulated by these machines. The machines themselves are dimensionless, and in fact, they can all reside at one single point, what in general relativity is known as a singularity, a point where a space of 3 dimensions has come down to a plane of 2 dimensions, has come down to a line of 1 dimension, has come down to a point of 0 dimensions. And by having all of the space atoms that constitute the entire universe in one single dimensionless point means that it takes to a whole new level that this Eastern idea that the world is one, very fundamentally, you, me, everything in the world, everything in the universe is all at one single point. And so it allows us to think about how communication can take place between disparate parts of the universe. In fact, how there can be a signal from a component on one side of the universe instantaneously recognized or transmitted on the other side of the universe. Normally, with conventional thinking about the limiting speed of light, we're talking about the realized universe in terms of space and time, but all of space and all of time are actually dimensions that are simulated by dimensionless objects called space atoms. So we'll touch a little bit more on this. It's, as I said, it's a bit like Copernicus trying to convince people that the sun is at the center of the Earth, the center of the solar system rather than the Earth. It takes a little while to get one's head around it, but it's a lot simpler to understand than some of the mysterious things that we're asked to believe. Well, not asked to believe, but asked to just take for granted about quantum theory in particular. Sort of spooky action as a distance, as Einstein once described it, by realizing that all space and time are in fact simulated by space atoms that are all residing at one single point, singularity, means that we can see how they can instantaneously be communicating with each other, because they are a superposition, as I call it, of machines. So I'll leave it at that for today. Have another taste of my Octomore. Extraordinary. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.